All righty, ladies and gentlemen, it is safe to say that Kuro Games has dropped on us a bomb. And that bomb is none other than the drip marketing for Chisa. Because boy, oh boy, I think the most highly anticipated, probably the most highly hyped up unit of 2.0, 2.x, well, they're finally arriving. And I think they're going to be arriving in version 2.8. And they're also arriving with some of the craziest background art, some of the craziest potential story spoilers or story hints that we've ever seen in a splash art before. Because one thing is clear from what we're seeing over here just at a baseline that I wanted to talk about, right? This splash art is a pretty big far cry from, well, the other splash arts that we've had before for the other 2.x drip marketed units. Y'all remember these guys, right? From back in the day, from like version 2.3 or 2.4. And then, of course, the splash arts that came out of it, right? You got Hell, you got Huang Long, you got the Moon, you got the Sun and Septimont, you got Frolova doing whatever she wants, and then Chisa in the background of one of the most industrial cities, industrial-looking places in Wuthering Waves, skyscrapers, all of that we've ever seen. So let's go ahead, let's talk about it, let's break it all down and see what this is all about. So we got the post-lament Anthropocene stars intertwined. I think I said that right. Give me some congratulations for that one. And the quote is, "I will sever this deadlock." And so if y'all aren't super sure what like a deadlock is, some people might be a little bit confused. It's a bit of a rare word. A deadlock is kind of something that like it like locks something off. So I imagine, right, just like taking a look at what's over here, she kind of almost looks like she's in some sort of like alternative reality, right? She looks like she's almost like in like a simulation. You can see like the cracks forming, buildings are flying, there's a Ferris wheel, there's an industrialized skyscraper, construction area, all of that. And I think that might be part of what she's actually doing in 2.8, where she might be trapped in like some sort of like artificial world. And, you know, naturally that's where the story is going to go. I don't think that this looking kind of like a weird reality, I think that's there for an intended reason. So let's go ahead and get a little bit more of like a background of her character from the archive. Chisa is a conscientious, level-headed student from the Star Torch Academy, whatever that means. To her, everything can be broken down, analyzed, and resolved, with the exception of human bonding. I don't know if that means that, like, the vibe that I'm getting from her is that she might be a little bit, neurodivergent. That's kind of like, somebody that kind of views things like this analytically. Maybe the right word might be like, I don't know. She seems like slightly, like a little bit, you know, she's got like a different way of thinking about things and communicating with people. And bonds can be severed, but this fragility is what makes them precious. So I'm just going to be honest over here. This has told us not that much about her character other than the fact that, you know, she seems like she's a bit of a scientist, that she's a bit of an analytical person. Let's go ahead and take a look at, well, everything that we're actually going to be seeing over here. So we clearly got the schoolgirl aesthetic, the black hair, the red motifs. This is probably, I think, one of the most popular archetypes that you can have in anime, just like in this sort of art style. This is something that we've seen repeated so many times, right? With different flares, different twists. You got the protagonist of like certain sort of like shonen or whatever the female version of shonen is, those types of series. And of course, right, all of like the slice of life, that sort of stuff. But naturally, I think she's gonna lean into a little bit more of the aggressive type of character with this type of styling, based off the fact that she has a gigantic fucking pair of scissors. Yeah, I'm just gonna be honest with you. This might be one of the most menacing weapons we've ever seen. I'm already seeing in chat over here, right? People are talking about like, oh, we got people from like Akame ga Kill. We got people from like all those Kill la Kill. Like, this is the thing. I haven't like watched like half of these. Haven't watched half of these. So I can only take your guys' word for it. There's a reason why this character is so popular. There's a reason why her drip marketing has an incredible number of reactions. There's a reason why when this entire set of characters was teased back in the day, she was one of the ones that people were looking forward to the most. That's because she essentially is a character that we've seen before, but not necessarily to the point where she's like copied, right? And everyone likes seeing this type of character again. They even had one like her in PGR. So naturally, I think that this is meant to be like the big bombshell that we have coming in the end of the version. And I do think that Kuro is, of course, going to do a lot of justice over here when it comes to making this character probably strong as hell. Because let's just be entirely real. I don't think that Kuro is a company or a game that Wuthering Waves is a game that we've seen where, like, the top tier, most well-received character designs end up being misses when it comes to their implementation in-game. Pretty much every single character that's been highly teased to this, or like highly popularized to this high of a degree, ends up having a pretty wild and powerful kit in-game. So, yeah, we've already done a video on that. She's probably going to be the Havoc Bane enabler. And we've already, we've taken a look at things like the Remenith, Threnodian Echo. Story spoilers over here if you haven't done it yet, but it's necessary for the discussion. This is the new weekly boss Echo, right? And you can see over here, we've got things like Havoc Bane support. So, take that as you will. She might be one of the more essential components of a new archetype moving forward, if you're excited for that or not. We'll just have to see. Now, let's get into the more exciting parts. We talked as much about her kit as I think we probably could have. Havoc Bane, debuff, that sort of stuff. Now, let's talk a little bit about the story significance of this unit, because I think that this is where a lot of the meat of the discussion is actually going to be. We all know that there's going to be a Cyberpunk Edge Runners collab arriving in the early parts of 2026. I think that was the date that was sort of finalized alongside the anniversary. And one thing we know about Cyberpunk is that it has a very specific sort of aesthetic. You need to be in a city. You need to have skyscrapers. You need to have like that sort of like dark, gritty atmosphere, the alleyways, the gangs, all of that. And let's just be honest, that's not really a vibe that you get from, Septimon. That's not really a vibe. This is actually going to be great that we have this. This isn't really a vibe that you're going to get from Raguna. That's not really a vibe you're going to get from the Black Shores. And that's, of course, that's not a vibe that you're going to get from Huanglong. Well, the closest that we got was the port city of Guizhou, and we all know how that one turned out. So, naturally, this presents itself as one of the most diverse and one of the most interesting expansions that we've had in the history of the game. Because for a lot of individuals, right, this is going to give those NTE vibes. And for those that have been keeping up with gacha or previously gacha games in the space, this really gives me Ananta vibes. Because, well, let's just be real here. I think that's the game that's coming to most of people's minds when they think about sort of like a built-up city. And so we've got the whole city aesthetic, and we've also got Cyberpunk. It's pretty clear, right? She's supposed to be our sort of like introductory character to this sort of dynamic. However, we still got to keep in mind that we might not actually be there yet. Because this line over here, I mentioned it at the start, I will sever this deadlock, and the whole like shattered, crystallized, looks like she's in an alternative reality. I think that this is where we're going to get the first preview, right? We get a bit of an introductory look at the new region in 2.8, but it's not like the real version of it. And then eventually, right, after we resolve the situation with Chisa and all of that, then we can go ahead and actually see the real thing. That's what I think is going to happen. Naturally, I don't think there are even any spoilers at all regarding anything going on in the story. So, yeah, I think that's what's going to occur. And this is the other factor that we have to talk about. And I think this is the one that's going to throw a lot of people off, especially if you're somebody that's done a little bit of research. There's this concept of Lahai-Roi, and this is going to be another 2.7 spoiler just in case. Lahai-Roi, which is essentially the area that was heavily teased at the end of the 2.x arc. And the idea over here is that this was meant to be like, a hint to the next major location. But the more research you actually do on Lahai-Roi, it gets a little bit confusing. Because, well, that's a location in the Middle East. And, well, the location that they're talking about in the Middle East in particular, I can safely say it doesn't, look like this. It looks a lot different than that. But this seems to me like it's just going to be a lot more of a symbolic feeling. Because it actually turns out, if you remember the quest, right? If you remember the quest, it actually turns out that Galbraina and her little jukebox that you were listening to, right? That little jukebox that you were listening to, that actually came from Lahai-Roi. And so one of the lines that's kind of significant about that is that this jukebox is long since discontinued due to the vast march in their technology's improvement. And so, this might actually be Lahai-Roi, or it might just be the name that they use to refer to it. within the Fraxidus for more of like that symbolic point of view. Because apparently the technology has greatly advanced to the point where things like these cassette players and stuff like that aren't necessarily in fashion anymore. They're heading more into like the sci-fi part of like technology. And, well, it does seem kind of like one-to-one, especially when you consider what all of the other cities in the game, or really the residential areas in the game, not really cities, actually look like. And so this is the thing, right? Lahai-Roi, in my opinion, might just be like a name for what many are thinking of as the new Federation. And let's just look over here, right? If it wouldn't be surprising to me at all if Calcharo, who is from the new Federation, came from a place like this, because he is a bit more of like the more modern looking, very like high-tech looking resonators, especially when you compare, you know, a design like this with like, you know, let's just look at a design like this, right? Where she just literally looks like a Roman gladiator. She's, you know, a belly dancer. And then you got good old Cucacharones over here looking like, bro is like straight up like a sci-fi, like bro looks like a Warframe character, bro. You cover his face, he looks like a goddamn Warframe character. And that's just kind of like the difference in technology that's going on. And it would make sense, especially when you consider this line, there's been a vast march in their technology's improvement. I think you guys can kind of see what's going on over here, right? I feel like this name, and clearly, right, that reference to the Bible, to the Hebrew language over here, I feel like it's being done as a way to kind of like throw some people off. Or, I'm entirely wrong. This is actually just a mirage. It's an illusion. And the story's actually genuinely taking place, like, in a desert, which would be kind of funny. You know, the story takes place in a desert, and this is like the mirage of like a city established area that they have going on. That could also be something that happens too. But the thing is, I think that Kuro Games has basically done some of the best work they've had when it comes to hyping up the new region, when it comes to hyping up the next expansion, and of course, all of the lore, all of the background that's supposed to be coming in. Because, let's just be honest, 2.7 ended with a bit of a pretty goddamn big bang. And what follows afterwards, right, is an incredible opportunity. And I think that the discussions that we're going to have, I think that, like, the sort of, like, theories for what's going on, like, clearly, there's, like, a goddamn, like, this reminds you of, like, a Tethys black hole. Like, this reminds you of the thing that, like, swallowed up Shorekeeper, and you can see it's, like, bringing in, you know, parts of the city. Maybe this is a recreation of a previous lament, right? Maybe this is a recreation of a previous lament, and it's like acting in real time the destruction of this city, and this whole thing is an entire goddamn bait, and that this place doesn't actually exist anymore. Much like how we relived through the lament and the disaster that hit the port city of Guizhou, right? When we revisited that place back in version 1.3. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of theories that you can make, but one thing that's clear is that we have absolutely no conclusions at all. Are we in a simulation? Are we in an oasis in a desert? Are we just in a new city? Are we in Ananta? Who knows? But I think that the fact that we don't have a definitive answer, I think the fact that we've had so many kind of like conflicting thoughts from the story reveals is going to drive some of the greatest discussion that this game has ever had. And I'm just going to be honest, I can't wait to find out more about this character, find out more about, like, her background, all of that, just to see how all the puzzle pieces are fitting together. Now, let's talk about the last final bits, and this is, of course, going to be talking about her design. I think that one thing is super clear about the way that she's kind of presented over here. She looks like she has a tall-ass model. I'm just going to be honest with you. One thing that we saw played around a lot with in this Raguna arc was that there was kind of a lot of, like, midgets introduced to the roster, right? We had, like, 1, 2, 3 of these very, very, like, shorter modeled, like, shorter, like, characters. And one thing that's clear is that, like, if you just, like, look at the actual, like, proportions and stuff. Let me go see if I can find her feet. If you, like, look at the actual proportions and stuff, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like, her legs are, like, over, like, half the size of her body. So, I would imagine that they're going for a bit more of, like, this sort of look, this sort of model when it comes to the character. And so, naturally, right, we're just getting ahead of, like, those discussions over here because every single time there's a character that, has like a bit of like that schoolgirl aesthetic going on, you're always going to have that discussion. I always don't ever even try to talk about it. I just want to mention that it's going to happen. You're always going to have a bunch of people making discussions about age. And I'm just going to be real over here, guys. And this is going to shock some people. Star Torch Academy might be a college. Yeah. Y'all think about that? Yeah, Star Torch Academy, it could be a college. Yeah, you don't actually know. And the thing is, I don't think it necessarily matters that much, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, bro, like, look at her face and everything. She look older than some of the units on the roster. I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna be real with you. She looks older than Phoebe. Let's be honest about that one, right? She got I'm gonna just be real. Like, I cover like the stuff below on the screen. I'm not gonna lie. She could like look like one of those like. Let me just do it for you guys. Like, if you just like do that, she looks like she could be like one of those like shrine, like those Japanese like shrine maidens, that sort of stuff like going on, like with what the top half is like looking like. Straight up, like that's the vibe that I'm getting from here. That is the vibe that I'm getting from here. She looks like one of those like, yeah, one of those like priestesses, one of those like shrine maidens. And yeah, it's the Hime cut. Oh, that's 1,000,000% what it is. It's the haircut. But yeah, the discussion over here, I think it's generally a pointless one until you find out what the hell the Star Torch Academy even is. So that's what I mean by that, is it's too early to even have these discussions. All you have is the character's outfit, and absolutely, without a doubt, no clue at all to anything else that's going on. And let's also be real here, right? She's also got one of the craziest weapons I've ever seen. And so I'm pretty sure that, the one thing's for clear, right? Kids aren't allowed to run around with scissors, at least from where I'm from. So I assume that she's got some degree of responsibility when the pair of scissors look this fucking big. Yeah. Now, the last thing that we'll talk about over here is in regards to like her weapon and her typing. I got no fucking clue, man. Okay? It's like she's got a gigantic pair of scissors. She might be a rectifier. She might be a sword. She might be a broadblade. She might be gauntlets, right? Because Sonny has a gigantic fucking sword and she's somehow a gauntlet user. Yuno has a bow and she's a gauntlet user. I wouldn't be surprised if Chisa has a giant pair of scissors and she's also a gauntlet user because she needs a special pair of gloves to wield this thing. The thing about Wuthering Waves is that it is literally impossible to guess what the weapon type of a character is unless they're like literally like holding the modeled sword, or they're like holding a pistol, right? Or they're like holding a gigantic, like broadblade or stuff like that. But if it's a weapon that clearly isn't defined by one of the 5 types in the game, brother man, you can have no actual take about it. There's no actual take to make. So yeah. We'll find out more probably when she's got her full details later, and we'll make sure to do a bit of a breakdown, right? A bit of a chat to talk about all of her potential, especially when we consider what some of the existing echo effects in the game with their passive bonuses to Havoc and Liberation damage are looking like. So yeah, that will be that for this coverage, ladies and gentlemen. Bit of a lore reveal over here, a bit of a character design spiel over here, a bit of an advisory warning over here for people to avoid pointless discussions. One thing is clear though, this is incredibly well received. This is incredibly hyped, and I think this character is probably going to break some records. And the last thing that I'll look at is, I actually forgot to take a look at this. We got 16 seconds over here. Yeah, that didn't really tell me anything, to be honest. It's very an anime-inspired opening, though. But, yeah. Usually you can tell the type of attribute the character is gonna be. I think it's pretty obvious she's Havoc. So, yeah. That'll be that for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully our coverage today satisfied you. Let me know what you all thought. Peace.